Hello, everyone. This is Stephen Balch, an instructor for micro and macroeconomics. What I'm going to do in this video is explain uh, the relationship between demand and quantity demanded for Chapter 4, the question on the assignment that dealt with demand and quantity demanded, because some of you seem like you had some problems understanding that. So in this video, I'm just going to kind of explain demand and quantity demanded and what a change in demand looks like and what a change in quantity demanded looks like on a graph. All right. So what I'm showing you here is just the PowerPoint presentation for Chapter 4. And basically, the relationship between demand and quantity demanded is that demand is basically the entire relationship between price and quantity demanded for a particular good. For example, pizza, I think, is the example they give you in your textbook. So all of the associated prices and quantities demanded for each one of those prices is considered demand for a particular good, and it's represented by the entire demand curve. Now, as we learned in Chapter 4, there is an inverse or negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So, in other words, as price increases, quantity demanded falls. As price goes down, quantity demanded increases. And that creates that downward sloping demand curve. All right. So when we talk about demand in economics, we're referring to the entire demand curve, showing all the various prices for that particular good and the associated quantities demanded at each one of those prices. Okay. The entire demand curve, what we consider demand. All right. Now, quantity demanded, when we talk about quantity demanded in economics, what we're talking about is one particular point along a given demand curve. So if you're looking at the demand curve for pizza, then it's one point along a given demand curve. And it basically, what it's telling us is the amount of a good consumers are willing and able to buy per period at a particular price. So when we're talking about quantity demanded, we're always looking at one particular price. Okay. We're basically saying that consumers are willing and able to buy this amount, a particular amount or number of a particular good. For example, pizza, this many pizzas at this particular price. Okay. And it's always one point along a given demand curve. All right. So let's kind of look at this. This is Exhibit 1 that's in your book in Chapter 4. And this is basically showing the market demand for pizza. Okay. So basically, you'll notice here that there's various prices for pizza along the demand curve, and at each one of those prices, there's an associated quantity demanded. So, for example, at a price of $15 per pizza, you'll look on this demand curve. 8 million pizzas per week are demanded at that price of $15. We drop the price to $12, then it actually increases the amount of or number of pizzas demanded per week to 14 million. So it goes from 8 to 14 million when we drop the price by $3 there. So anytime that we're talking about a change in quantity demanded, which was one of the questions on the assignment, to explain what a change in quantity demanded would look like on a demand curve, well, it would be a movement along an existing demand curve. So in this case, if we change the price of pizza from $15 per pizza to $12, then we're going to be moving from point A on this demand curve to point B. Okay, so that movement along a given demand curve is what we call a change in quantity demanded, and it can only be caused by one thing: a change in the price for that good that we're looking at, in this case, pizza. Okay? Now, when we distinguish that from a change in demand, basically, when we're looking at a change in demand, a change in demand is always going to be shown as a shift of the entire demand curve, either to the right or to the left. Okay, depending on whether the change in the variable that affects demand either is a positive impact on demand or negative. Okay, now the 5 things that can shift the demand curve are basically listed here on this slide. So you have money income of consumers, prices of other goods, consumer expectations, number or composition of consumers in the market, and consumer taste. So these are basically things other than the price of the good that we're looking at that can affect demand. So when you're looking at a demand curve, anything other than the price of that particular good that you're looking at in the graph, if anything that affects demand changes, any variables other than the price of that good that changes, that affects demand for that good, then it's going to shift the entire demand curve. Okay, so again, money and income of consumers. It should seem logical to you that if people have more money, if consumers have more money to spend, then demand for all normal goods is going to increase. So that means the demand curve for all normal goods is going to shift to the right. Okay, if there's less income in the economy for some reason, maybe increased taxes or inflation, things like that, then it will shift the demand curve for all normal goods to the left, or basically it will be a decrease in demand. Okay, now another thing is prices of other goods. As you learned in chapter 4, there are various ways that goods can be either related or unrelated. If goods are related to each other, then the price of one good is going to affect the demand for another. All right, and the way that it affects demand for another good depends on whether, first of all, whether the goods are related, and also if they're related, it depends on whether the goods are considered substitutes for each other or complementary goods. Okay, now if goods are substitutes, for example, let's say that, of course, most of us would consider margarine and butter as substitutes for each other, right? And so if the price of butter increases, then some people are going to shift their demand from butter to the now relatively lower priced margarine. Okay, and that, so basically how we would depict that on a demand curve, on a graph, is it would be a rightward shift of the demand curve for margarine. Okay, and so prices of other goods will affect demand for a particular good if the goods are related. Now, if the goods are complementary, let's say, for example, peanut butter and jelly, if the price of peanut butter increases, then we would expect the demand for jelly to shift to the left. In other words, it decrease, because people are going to buy less of peanut butter and jelly because they're normally consumed together. All right. Now, if the goods are completely unrelated, then, for example, if we look at the price of automobiles, it's probably not going to have any effect on the price for computers, because the two goods are completely unrelated. Okay. All right. So prices of other goods can shift the demand curve or change demand. Consumer expectations. A good example here is if we expect the price of a particular good to change in the future, either increase or decrease, that's going to affect our demand for that good now, today. For example, if we think that the price of gasoline is going to double tomorrow, well, what are we going to do? We're going to probably go out and try to buy as much gas as we can today to try to eliminate having to pay that higher price. If we think the price of a good like gas is going to decrease in the future, then we're probably going to wait and buy it when we think it's going to be a lower price. So that's going to shift demand uh, uh, downward now, today. Okay. So consumer expectations, what we think is going to happen in the future, will also shift the demand curve. Now, another thing that shifts the demand curve is the number or composition of consumers in the market. If there are more consumers out there because of increase in population, then that should seem logical to you. If there are more buyers out there in the market, then it's going to shift the demand curve to the right. It's going to increase demand for all normal goods. If there's a decrease in the population, obviously it would lower the demand. In other words, shift the demand curve to the left or downward. Also, the composition of consumers in the market plays a factor in demand for goods. For example, if your particular good is marketed to a particular age group or a particular gender or a particular area of the country, and the composition of consumers in your market, either in that particular, with that characteristic, whether it's demographic or whatever it is, if that changes in the market, so that you have either more consumers in your target market or less, then that's going to also shift your demand curve. Okay. The last thing that can shift the demand curve is consumer taste. All right. Consumer preferences and taste change all the time. Especially things like diet foods and diet fads, and certain toys are very popular one year and then go out of favor the next year. Same thing with fashion and automobiles and things like that. So depending on what consumer preferences or taste are and how they change, that will also shift the demand curve either to the right or to the left, depending on whether it favors your good or whether it is not favorable to your good. Okay. All right. So those are the 5 things that can shift the demand curve. So just in summary, remember, a change in quantity demanded is shown as a movement along an existing demand curve, and it can only be caused by a change in the price of that particular good. If anything else that affects the demand for that good changes, then it's going to shift the entire demand curve. And those 5 things I just covered right here. Okay, so these are the 5 things that can shift the demand curve. So if you have any questions about the relationship between demand and quantity demanded, just let me know. But I just thought this video might help some of you who were having some problems understanding this concept. So I will see you in the next video. Thank you.